Welcome, absolutely welcome, everybody. When Dr. Sane asked me to present this discourse, I was totally surprised and totally honored. I have been coming to the discourse series at the Hindu Mandir for a number of years, and I have benefited from it hugely. But to be asked to make a presentation is in a completely different category. So, as I say, I feel truly honored. And I'm also really just wonderfully touched by the fact that a number of friends have joined from various places, including two whose family friendship with us goes back to 50 years and more. So this is a special occasion for me. I'd like to begin the conversation by reading a portion of the preface to a wonderful book of essays that's called Gathering Moss. Gathering Moss was written by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is one of the most eloquent nature writers in the United States today. She is distinguished teaching professor of environmental and forest biology at the State University of New York. Her own research specialty is mosses. And she's also a highly articulate member of the Potawatomi Nation, who has done absolutely amazing work on bringing Native American tradition and modern science together for deepening our understanding of nature and also for inspiring us to care for nature in a better way. Here are Robin's opening words, in which she shares a wonderful experience from her childhood. This is what she says. My first conscious memory of science, or was it religion, comes from my kindergarten class, which met in the old Grange Hall. We all ran to press our noses to the frosty windows when the first intoxicating flakes of snow began to fall. Miss Hopkins was too wise a teacher to try and hold back the excitement of 5-year-olds on the occasion of the first snow, and out we went. In boots and mittens, we gathered round her in the soft swirl of white. From the deep pocket of her coat, she took out a magnifying glass. I'll never forget my first look at snowflakes through that lens, spangling the woolly sleeve of her navy blue coat like stars in a midnight sky. Magnified tenfold, the complexity and detail of a single snowflake took me completely by surprise. How could something as small and ordinary as snow be so perfectly beautiful? I couldn't stop looking. Even now, I remember the sense of possibility, of mystery that accompanied that first glimpse. For the first time, but not the last, I had the sense that there was more to the world than immediately met the eye. I looked out at the snow falling softly on the branches and rooftops with a new understanding that every drift was made up of a universe of starry crystals. It's the time when I first had an inkling that the already gorgeous world becomes even more beautiful the closer you look. And here is how Robin closes her preface. In indigenous ways of knowing, we say that a thing cannot be understood until it is known by all 4 aspects of our being: mind, body, emotion, and spirit. The scientific way of knowing relies only on empirical information about the world, gathered by body and interpreted by mind. My essays in the book intentionally give voice to both ways of knowing, letting matter and spirit walk companionably side by side, and sometimes even dance. I have held that image ever since I first read these words. My own story relating to matter and spirit begins with almost a literal walking side by side and with a bit of dancing that, that manifested in my mind during the walk. I have shared this story once before. That was with the congregation of the Unitarian Church on Whidbey Island, north of Seattle, where my wife Ivana and I lived for about 20 years. And here's what I said to that gathering with a couple of minor adjustments. Once upon a time, long, long ago, in July of 1960 to be exact, a young couple set sail from New York, bound for India, aboard a freighter called the Hellenic Splendor. 6 weeks after departing, they landed in Bombay, that's what it was called at the time still, having gotten engaged along the way in Port Said. A few weeks after reaching their destination of New Delhi, via a 36-hour train ride from Bombay, they set out again, this time for the fabled Himalayas. Their destination was Badrinath, one of the sources of the sacred river Ganga and the site of one of India's holiest pilgrimage temples. Their route was a footpath that had been used by pilgrims for over 1,000 years. It wound for about 50 miles high above the Alaknanda River, traversing a landscape in which every bend and every hilltop seemed to be associated with a story. Finally, these young pilgrims reached the temple at Badrinath, and the next day they walked toward the glacier from which the Alaknanda River started on its long journey to join the Ganga in the plains far, far, far below. They passed through Mana village, the last village in India before the border of Tibet, which you enter over nearby Mana Pass at over 18,000 feet. And instead of heading for the pass, they took the trail to the great 400-foot tall waterfall of Vasudhara at 12,000 feet, even scrambling up alongside it to a tiny cave, which allowed them to look down the valley through the dramatic gush of water and spray. Now, both of these pilgrims were biologists, and strapped to the tops of their backpacks, they carried presses for drying the plants that they collected along the way. The whole collection of dried plants was meant to be sold to university collections in the United States, and the proceeds were meant to help defray the costs of the sojourn in India. Well, in this case, the rain and snow started to fall and the plants molded rather than drying. But nevertheless, the collecting process brought science together with pilgrimage through a sacred landscape. And that was a wonderful experience for young minds and hearts. On the way back down to the start of the pilgrimage trail at Joshimath, a vision appeared to one of the intrepid collectors. The vision was of a small laboratory situated above a mountain stream. The lab would contain scientific instruments like microscopes, that would be science. But the way down from the lab to the stream would not be a simple path. Its end would be formed by stone steps like those that lead down to water in many Indian holy places, including temples known as ghats. And that would embody spirit. A scientific search and a spiritual search would, in Robin's words, walk side by side and even dance. About 10 weeks after returning from their exhilarating combined pilgrimage and biological expedition, the couple, that was Ivan and I, were married at the Quaker International Center in Delhi. We have remained married for the rest of our lives and also very much tied to India. In November of 2019, Ivan did not survive being struck by a car while we were crossing a street in downtown Minneapolis in connection with the performance of Indian classical dance in Bharatanatyam style by Ragmala, whom many of you know. The final puja in her honor was performed right here in the Hindu Mandir by Sri Gautam Bhatt. Throughout our life together and continuing still, even though she is gone, Ivan and I shared a spiritual journey that was founded on our experience that first year in India, and having many other connections, including the profound spiritual path of Siddha Yoga. And these connections are still very much alive, as you can see from this discourse. Just to give you one other example, when Sri Gautam performed the puja for Ivan here in Maple Grove, some dear friends in Tirupati connected to the live stream, and they performed their own puja together with ours. Being physically separated by some thousands of miles made no difference. So this more than 60-year-long engagement with Indian tradition and philosophy hovers in the background of many of my personal experiences. And it's in this framework that I want to share 3 additional specific experiences with you. All 3 of these experiences have been in nature. All 3 have started with an internal conversation, myself talking with myself about my scientific understanding of or questions about what I was seeing at the moment. And all 3 have had a profound effect on me because I have suddenly experienced something that I never expected. A sense of connection with everything there is. A sense that is consistent with, but feels very, very different from the scientific understanding that I have. And that is why I have titled this talk, When Nature Opens Both the Mind and the Heart. So here's the first experience, which I have several times referred to as the trees and I. It took place about 50 years ago in the early 1970s. Our family was living in Seattle. Our older daughter, actually born in Tirupati, but that's a separate story, was around 8. Our younger daughter, Tanya, was around 5. Ivan and I both held starting academic positions in biology at the University of Washington. So there were 2 active children, and both of us parents were in the early stages of demanding careers, and life was very full. Ivan and I had always loved nature, and we spent a lot of time in the mountains, and we continue to do that despite all the busyness. And one time, I managed to free up a whole day just for me, and I decided to go on a solo hike in the nearby Cascade Mountains. That's the range to the east of Seattle on the inland side. And my destination was the crest of a rugged ridge. The way up was several miles long and several thousand feet up a steep slope, And the trail itself was one switchback after another, after another, after another. But it was in excellent condition and the footing was very secure. And as a result, my mind was free to wander. All around me were ancient trees, mostly Douglas firs. It was old growth forest that had never been logged. The ancient trees were enormous, but interspersed among them were also younger ones down to slender saplings. As I walked, I found myself musing about my relationship with these trees. The trees and I were very different, weren't we? I mean, after all, I walked and they stood firmly planted by their roots. Their bodies were made of rigid wood, while mine had bones and muscles and blood and many other tissues. I needed to eat, whereas they used the sunlight to make their own sugars. And yet, we were both alive. And what exactly does it mean to be alive? I asked myself. From the point of view of science, at least one essential aspect of life is the use of energy. And the trees got their energy from the sun through the photosynthesis carried out in their green leaves and needles, whereas I had to eat food through my mouth. But both the trees and I metabolized sugars to obtain the biochemical energy that we needed for immediate use. Well, that meant that we shared some energy-related biochemical pathways. We also shared the pathways that allowed us to make the new DNA that was needed for every new cell in each of our bodies, tree or human. Biochemical pathways only work when enzymes are available to facilitate their reactions. Enzymes are proteins. Therefore, we also share the pathways by means of which we synthesized the required enzymatic proteins. And my mind went further, as it always does. How do you make the wide array of specific proteins that you require to facilitate specific biochemical reactions? Well, you start with the instructions encoded in your genes. So even though the trees and I were so profoundly different from each other, we also shared an abundance of genes. And how did we get to share genes? Because we had a common ancestor. It was way, way back in time, of course, but we shared an origin. This was the way my scientific mind worked as I walked up the trail one switchback after another. Absolutely straightforward modern science. The trees and I share genes, therefore we are related. And then all of a sudden, with no forewarning, my experience changed. Instead of just knowing that the trees and I shared genes and therefore were related, were distant family, I suddenly also felt it. And the difference between knowing and feeling was profound. I truly sensed that I was walking among my distant cousins. Then I noticed the sun shining through the trees on the patch below the trail. And as soon as I saw that sunny patch, I felt connected with the sun. And as soon as I felt connected with the sun, the Milky Way popped up in my mind, and I immediately felt connected to it. And then, even though I was just standing on a trail in the Cascade Mountains of Washington, I felt the entire cosmos, vast as it is, to be my home. That was an absolutely extraordinary experience. Later in the 80s or 90s, I found some words that really helped to convey this experience. There was a wonderful women's singing group called Lipana, whom we heard perform in Seattle, and they're still singing today. They're based in Washington, D.C. They sang magnificently in close harmony, mostly a cappella, unaccompanied. Number of the songs they sang came from Bulgaria, and they had qualities that I resonated with because of my own upbringing in Slovak culture. But among the songs that drew me the most was not one with East European roots, but rather one with these very simple words of unknown origin. I will be gentle with myself. I will love myself. I am a child of the universe, being born each moment. And a child of the universe being born each moment. And I would actually like to play this song for you. So imagine that it is a devotional song, perhaps a very gentle bhajan, and its goal is to bring on a state of inner stillness and a sense of connectedness. This performance by Libana, just available on YouTube, is only about 2.5 minutes long. So please just settle back and let it enter you after Arunji has started it. Over the years, I have adopted these words as my credo, as my statement of personal belief. I am a child of the universe. I have emerged out of the universe and the universe's processes exactly as science teaches us. And I am its child, not, as a science textbook might say, a product of the universe, but its child. I belong here. The universe is my home. This is what I first felt on that trail in the Cascade Mountains 50 years ago. And I've been blessed to feel that many times since then. The second experience I'd like to share with you also took place in the Pacific Northwest. Yvonne and I both retired from academic life around the year 2000, and we moved from Seattle a bit north to Whidbey Island. We stayed there for another 20 years. Early on, we were among the starting members of a wonderful group that we called the Circle of Caring. And this group was formed for the purpose of openly dealing with questions of aging and ultimately of dying. We met twice a month, and we still meet twice a month, 15 years or more later. Now we take advantage of Zoom, and in fact, we met just this past Monday evening. So a few times during the early years, in addition to those biweekly meetings, we held retreats for a day or two at the Whidbey Institute. The Whidbey Institute stewards about 100 acres of land. They take care of it very carefully. Most of the land is forest, but there are also a few meadows with buildings on them and some vegetable gardens and flower beds. And one day, during a break in our indoor conversation, I set out to take a walk on one of the forest trails. And to reach the start of the trail, I walked past one of the flower beds. And I stopped to look at the brightly colored flowers, musing once again about light, how daylight comes to us from the sun and reflects off surfaces like flower petals and thereby allows us to see them and appreciate their beauty. And once again, just like on that trail in the Cascade Mountains, my musing about sunlight transformed in a flash into an inner sense of being connected with the sun and through the sun with the rest of the universe. I wasn't thinking about the universe. I wasn't even thinking directly about the sun. I was thinking about how I get to see flowers in the flower bed at Whitby Institute. And yet, all of a sudden, this sense of being a part of the universe being my home, appeared within me. The last experience I want to tell you about took place a few years ago here in Minnesota. Yvonne and I were at a day-long meditation course, Siddha Yoga meditation course down in Plymouth. And it was in the fall, it was quite cold. So when a break came, we didn't go outside. We only stepped into the three-season porch that faced the backyard, beautiful backyard. And I stood by one of the windows and I looked out and I spotted a reflection of the golden leaves of the trees in a gently flowing stream. Once again, my mind started to engage with what I was seeing. I started to wonder, what exactly happens at the water surface when a reflection takes place? What happens when photons, individual photons coming from the sun, strike water molecules on the water's surface, on the stream surface? Those molecules are dancing around like crazy in an agitated fashion. So how do I get to see a sharp and orderly image? I had no idea. Absolutely no idea. And again, all of a sudden, superimposed on my scientific knowledge that yes, it was the sun that was the source of the light that bounced first off the surface of the leaves and then off the surface of the water and into my eyes. Superimposed on all that was that wonderful feeling of being connected with the sun and through the sun with the universe. Not just knowing, feeling that connection with the whole of creation. Well, there are many people who have had experiences of this kind. And as we approach the end of this morning's discourse, I'd like to read you a passage from a very recently published book called The Transcendent Brain, Spirituality in the Age of Science. And the passage vividly describes someone else's experience of very much the kind that I have had. The book is written by Alan Lightman. Lightman is a highly distinguished astrophysicist. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences. For many years, he was a professor at Harvard. Then he shifted to MIT. Now, over the years, in addition to being a physicist, he also became a writer and even a novelist. And by the close of his years at MIT, when he stepped away to do more writing, he had been formally appointed a professor not of physics, but of humanities. And here is how Lightman opens his introduction to the transcendent brain. For many years, a family of ospreys lived near our house on a small island in Maine. Each season, my wife and I observed their rituals and habits. In mid-April, the parents would arrive at the nest, having spent the winter in South America, and lay eggs. In late May or early June, the eggs hatched. As the father dutifully brought fish dinners to the nest each day, the babies would grow bigger and bigger, and in mid-August were large enough to make their first flight. Throughout the season, my wife and I recorded all these comings and goings. I did that every year for several years. Then, one late August afternoon, two juvenile ospreys of that season took flight for the first time as I stood observing them from my second floor circular deck. All summer long, they had watched me on that deck as I watched them. That deck was about nest high, so to the fledgling birds, it must have looked like I was in my nest just as they were in theirs. On this particular afternoon, their maiden flight, they did a wide half-mile loop out over the ocean, and then they headed straight at me with tremendous speed. Now, a juvenile osprey, although slightly smaller than a full-grown adult, is still a large bird with powerful and sharp talons. And my immediate impulse was to run for cover, since the birds could have ripped my face off. But something held me to my ground. When they were within 15 or 20 feet of me, the two birds suddenly veered upward and away. But before that dazzling and frightening vertical climb, for about half a second, we made eye contact. Words cannot convey what was exchanged between us in that instant. It was a look of connectedness, of mutual respect, of recognition that we shared the same land. It was a look that said as clear as spoken words, "We are brothers in this place." After the two young ospreys were gone, I found that I was shaking and in tears. And to this day, I don't understand what happened in that half second. But it was a profound connection to nature and the feeling of being part of something much larger than myself. I'm a scientist, Leichman says, and I have always had a scientific view of the world, by which I mean that the universe is made of material stuff and only material stuff. And that stuff is governed by a small number of fundamental laws. I'm a materialist, yet I have transcendent experiences. I have feelings of being part of things larger than myself. I have a sense of connection to other people and to the world of living things, and even to the stars. I have a sense of beauty. I have experiences of awe. What did Robin Wall Kimmerer say? The scientific way of knowing relies on empirical information from the world, gathered by body and interpreted by mind. These essays, she said, give voice to both ways of knowing, letting matter and spirit walk companionably side by side, and sometimes even dance. Just like Alan Lightman and the ospreys, just like the trees and I. A companionship in the occasional dance, for which all who have received the blessing of such an experience are deeply, deeply grateful. Let me close this talk with a wonderful poem that expresses this sense of gratitude. It's called "As If to Demonstrate an Eclipse." The author is Billy Collins, one of America's most popular poets. He's the recipient of numerous awards, and 2 decades ago was the poet laureate. The gratitude he expresses in this poem originates in a scene that he created, or perhaps only imagined, on a table inside his house. And it relates to the sun, the earth, and the moon. Whereas the experiences that I have shared with you this morning all took place in nature itself. The feelings of gratitude, however, are very similar. And here is the poem. I pick an orange from a wicker basket and place it on the table to represent the sun. Then down at the other end, a blue and white marble becomes the earth. And nearby, I lay the little moon of an aspirin. I get a glass from a cabinet, open a bottle of wine, then I sit in a ladder-back chair, a benevolent God presiding over a miniature creation myth. And I begin to sing a homemade canticle of thanks for this perfect little arrangement, for not making the earth too hot or cold, not making it spin too fast or slow, so that the grove of orange trees and the owl become possible, not to mention the rolling wave, the play of clouds, geese in flight, and the Z of lightning on a dark lake. Then I fill my glass again and give thanks for the trout, the oak, and the yellow feather, singing the room full of shadows as sun and earth and moon circle one another in their impeccable orbits. And I get more and more cockeyed with gratitude. Robin Wall Kimmerer in the snow, I in a landscape long considered sacred and later among trees and contemplating flowers and golden leaves. Alan Lightman connecting with ospreys, Billy Collins marveling at an eclipse. Again and again, the immediate moment somehow merged with the universe. Immersed in nature, understanding with the mind, and connecting with the heart. What a dance. What a dance. Yeah. Thank you.
John, enjoyed it greatly. This is Shashi.
Thank you.
I knew you would do a marvelous job. I expected that. It did beautiful. I think the key word that you described and hit me appropriately was there's a difference between knowing and feeling. We know the sugar is sweet, but unless you put it in your mouth and feel it, you don't understand the sweetness.
That's right.
You can describe it in scientific fashion in any way you like, but until you have that personal experience, feel it, you really don't know it.
Exactly.
And I think you described it beautifully. And I think your examples from the various books, other individuals and personally, is very much akin to what we get when you go in deep samadhi. When we are meditating, most of the times you reach a certain level or certain depth of connectedness. But every once in a while, you go so deep into that connectedness, you forget who you really are. Not that you forget in a sense that you forget the sense in general term, but that you're alive, but you forget your identity as other people recognize you as.
Mm.
And you connect yourself with that ultimate entity, whatever name you want to attach to. And at that time, you're completely lost, if you will. Not a question lost, you merge with that entity. That's deep samadhi. So those are the moments you're describing it. And I think, I don't know whether you want to respond to it or not, but when you go through those experiences personally of tasting it, then you change yourself as an individual. You are no longer the same John that you were trying to climb on near Badrinath to the Himalayas. You're a totally different human being. But again, to reach that level of understanding and experience and knowing and feeling comes through the life experiences. And I think these experiences basically confirm what our teachers have been telling us all the time. For example, when we read Ishavasya Upanishad, the first verse is Ishavasyam idam sarvam. The entire world is encased, encompassed, covered by nothing but God by any name. And once you connect in this particular fashion, which is so beautifully depicted, you connect it with that Isha. So thank you again, appreciate it. Thank you.
No, I just wanted to repeat my thanks to Dr. Sane for inviting me to do this, because I can tell you that putting these thoughts together itself was an opening process.
Yeah.
I'd like to share my own way of relating to the stories that come out of Indian tradition, because I have been involved with them for a very long time. I have heard many versions. I have read many versions. I come to the discourses. I have taken courses on the Upanishads and all that kind of thing. And of course, those stories are in the telling very different from what comes out of science. They have some, if you dig deep enough, there are parallels, to be sure, but the specifics of those stories are quite different, and the words and the names that are used are very different. Many years ago, in the 80s, I was confronting this issue, and it was troubling me to no end, because every time I heard about subtle bodies or chakras or karma or nadis or what have you, I put up a resistance. I said, how do you know? How do you know? Where's the evidence, right? My scientist side came to the front. And I had the good fortune of taking a course with a teaching Swami on the Siddha Yoga path. And the course included all of this terminology. And I was so upset that I wrote her a long letter in which I listed all the things that I objected to. And I told her what I was enjoying at the same time, because part of our homework for the course was to go out into nature and observe nature. And so I told her 2 or 3 incidents that I had had with the natural world while going around walking in the way she said we should. And bless her heart, she wrote me a long letter back, 3 or 4 pages handwritten, which I still have because it's been a guidepost for me ever since. And it was this amazing conclusion. And at the very end, the Swami, who was teaching all of these concepts, said to me, she made a list of all the things that I had objected to. And she said, forget about it. Forget about it. Don't pay any attention to all those concepts, right? All you need to do, what really counts, is to do the practices that open your heart. And everything else will come on its own in due course. And I have used that as a guide ever since, because it allows me to take in the messages of these stories and the sort of more philosophical concepts without worrying about whether they are correct or not, without worrying how they relate to modern science, right? I just can take them on their own and absorb what they have to convey to me. That that has been a spiritual lifesaver, let me tell you.
I'm going to, my name is Mahananda and also Margaret. And I'm one of the people Johnny has had arguments with over the years. And I just loved this presentation, Johnny. And I also liked Shashi Khan's observation about how the idea of sugar is just an idea until you put it in your mouth. And it is exactly what this teaching Swami, I think, was saying to you. It doesn't, everything is just material. It's just the material world until you take it into your experience. And once you take it into your experience, it's funny. I'm a writer and an editor, and I realize how difficult it is to convey in language and experience. And you have done a beautiful job today with that, because I could feel that you were touching and tasting the experience as you talked about it again. And that is really the heart of every path, every way up the mountain. So thank you so much, Johnny, for sharing this today. It was really beautiful.
Thank you, Mahan. Yeah. And your patience with me has made a difference.
John, this is Prasanna.
Yes.
And to add to the wonderful experiences that you had, if you take the scenic view on the way to Stillwater and stand on the small hill and look at the St. Croix River, which I have done many times, the feeling that you get of serenity, the peace, the unison cannot be put into words. The river shares its majesty without any favor to everybody who looks at it. Because to the river, I am part of nature, my neighbor is part of nature. The river treats us equally with no favor. And that feeling of belonging is something you have to experience. Dr. Sane said, you have to put sugar in your mouth to know what sweet is. So that's the reason why they say, when you're troubled, your mind is troubled, they say, why don't you go out into the nature and spend some time outside? And that's precisely the kind of experience that you shared with us. And I thank you very much. It was a beautiful talk, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you.
Joni,
Yes.
if I can add, you have taught me quite a bit about love of nature, in your writings and our discussions, and describing every morning that you go out and get the prasad from the nature. So I have taken that into my, into heart. Every day when I come down from upstairs after I take my shower and look outside, say I don't have to go outside. I can feel that connection. You have taught me how to feel that. So every morning for 5 minutes, I go out through each of the windows in my house and get connected. Thank you very much. But you had described that in a much more sublime, more great way. And I too shed tears when Alan saw those ospreys looking at him for half a second. That connection, there are no words to describe that. Thank you.
John?
Yes.
Well, once again, it was a great talk. Only thing, one suggestion for all the bright scientific minds who had the privilege to listen to you this morning is perhaps a suggestion is we human beings are hardworking, go through the education process, achieve so many degrees and qualifications and recognitions. And unfortunately, as we gain the knowledge, we tend to develop a inappropriate sense of yourself in the form of what we call ego.
Mhm.
And that seems to overcome the innocence that the little baby that is born the first day expresses with the love that she sees in the mother's eyes. And that's exactly what we need to do. So as Godan was talking about going for early morning walks, but those walks have to be accompanied with a sense of simplicity, keeping the ego back and your diplomas on the wall, but walk away with nothing else except yourself and your innocence. I think then it's so, I'm not saying easy, but less difficult to connect with the beauty of the nature. So that's the only suggestion I would have. I find myself greatly at peace when I do the meditations and walk outside. And as I was listening to you, I just got back from Arizona last night, and my daughter was complaining that certain flowers don't seem to come in her yard. So I spent some time with them, did what I thought was appropriate to spend time. And as I was leaving yesterday morning, one huge blossom was coming up, and she just sent me a complete picture. Said, "Dad, these are your flowers that you created for me." But the thing is, I have a feeling. I mean, obviously, I can't express it for everybody else. Is that if you have that kind of love and connectedness with the nature responds to you too. So I think the fact that he was talking about that wild bird driving at him was able to see in his eyes the love he had for Osprey, that jetted that little bird up away from his normal mode of attack. So it was a connectedness both ways. So that's the way I look at it. I think the key is basically is keep your ego in your coat rack somewhere else and walk away with simplicity and innocence. Thank you.
Now, as we are talking about the sugar and the taste and the tongue, what came to my mind, just a couple of lines that I wrote a few months or a few years ago. This thought, when the duet being the other or the plurality, becomes a duet, which is no other or a singularity, magic or miracle happens. When the duet becomes a duet, the magic or miracle happens. When the music, the sound waves, hits the eardrums, melody is realized. When the sweets meet the tongue, taste is materialized. When the image of that flower is formed on the retina of the eyes, albeit inverted, the miracle of seeing, that is the magic, happens. When the aroma of that flower becomes one with the nose, scent is assimilated, smell or the aroma, and so forth. So the duet being a dueta in all these cases. Similarly, like when the soul or the consciousness behind everything and anything is experienced or realized, enlightenment ensues. And this one I heard from Swami Sarpriyananda in his talk, The Art of the Shortcut, this particular just last line, the soul and the enlightenment. So that's what I was hearing when I, heard it, like body and mind and all. Dr. San's analogy of sugar and the tongue, the sweetness. So I just wanted to share that. And then also in our life, by the way, we continually, actually, I would say continuously, switch between duality and non-duality. That's how they play their role.
I've had a thought about that wonderful sugar taste image. And that is that in order to have the experience of the sweetness of sugar, your sugar sensors have to be working. If they're not working, you can put all the sugar you want in your mouth and you will never experience it. So there's a kind of a cultivation of openness that is part of the process, that simply coming in contact with something that is inspiring or revealing or whatever is not sufficient. You have to be open to it. And that is the part of the message from the teaching Swami that has meant so much to me, is that she didn't just say, don't worry about the intellectual concepts. She also said, do the practices that help you open your heart. You need them both, not to be distracted, but also to be open. And I think that comes through in all these stories of experiences that people have had, is that they rely on being open to experiencing a connection. You know, it's not something that comes automatically. And I, at the moment at least, am thinking that this is what my own spiritual journey actually consists of, is nurturing my sense of openness. And I do the things that I have learned by experience are helpful for that.
John, this is Geeta, and I've really enjoyed your talk, and I agree with you totally about nature. I was a runner for about 55 plus years.
Wow.
And I used to get up at 3:30 in the morning. I was out there, whether it's 40 below or not, out there by 4:10. I was running about 5 to 6 miles a day. And that was my puja, because there was nobody. I kind of connect with the darkness, and it was like my own fairyland, or whatever you want to call it. And that was my puja, basically. And I connected, things just opened up. I mean, I was totally in a very, very different world. And I think also, like, I remember Dr. Sani saying something to the effect that there are different wavelengths, right? That time in the morning, those wavelengths are very different, right? Than the lower ones are later on. Like, I would never get that feeling unless I went out at that time. And now somehow I was there, right? I mean, God gives you what you need. I lived on this little lake, non-motorized. I called it a pond, but behind it, there were woods. So I would see all these amazing animals, and I connected with them. They would stop, we would chat for a few minutes, and then I would come home. And I just really, and now in 48 hours, about less than a month ago, I made the decision to move down here to Florida to be next to my daughter. And where I'm living, there are palm trees, and I'm again on the water. It's a big community, but there is just so much greenness and everything that I just feel now, instead of just the morning, throughout the day, even when I go for a walk, maybe it's all these years, right? Developing, like you said, all those instincts and everything. Now I don't have to do anything special, and I'm just connected. So I really enjoyed your talk. I'm so glad that there are a lot of people out there who, there's just something about nature, isn't it? I mean, you don't need to read books. You don't need to do anything. Just keep like you said, keep your mind open, walk out there, just step into it. And it is so amazing. Nature just embraces you, just takes you in its arms and just tells you, come on, I'll take you for a walk, right? And if you cannot walk, Now my knees, after so many years of running, they don't do as good. So I walk, right? But when you can't do what you can do, it lifts you up, picks you up, right? Remember that story about this disciple talking to God and saying, when I needed you, where were you? I didn't see you. And then God, and I only saw one footsteps. And then God said to, right, or I think more as nature, saying to this person that, hey, that was when I was carrying you. Right? So thank you again. Thank you so much. And I appreciate, I'm so glad you decided to give us share your experiences and your knowledge with us. We are so used to, we are so blessed to have like Dr. Sane and Dr. Kumar, Dr. Rambachan. But it's nice when you are Anand and, you also share your amazing knowledge. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, John. And I think it takes a particular kind of person who's ready to go in nature and then see, what you are seeing, the connection. Because otherwise, most people can go out and, see the buzzing insects and the monkeys and the birds yelling. You can't sit in that for 15 minutes in the summer in Minnesota when there's, so it's, I think it's you because you are calm. That's why you are able to see the connection. It's not, I won't blame the nature or give credit to the nature for it. So thank you.
No, I think if I can add to that, I think I recognize that we have to behave like a honeybee and not like a fly. Honeybee tries to find out the sweetness in everything that is available there outside, whereas the fly tends to find out the worst thing in the room and goes at that particular place. So we have to get the vision from the honeybee, how to find the goodness. So you have to make sure that you develop your sense to pick out the best that is. And that, of course, as John rightly said, by preparing your mind to appreciate the beauty. Thank you.
Before we close, let me add one little story that builds on honeybees. Was just published in the last month or two. It's quite amazing to me. Honeybees and bumblebees make a whirring sound with their wings. You can hear them. There are certain flowers that have sound detectors, so they pick up the vibration of the honeybees. What does that mean? Those flowers add additional sugar to their nectar within minutes, so that when the honeybee finally lands on the flower, it's getting sweeter nectar than it would have had it been silent. Now, there's nature at work.
It's like a mother trying to immediately giving the milk as soon as the baby starts crying. So that's exactly.
Yeah, but these are birds and flowers.
But that's what it is. Connectedness, yes. Thank you.
Exactly, connectedness, yes.
Yeah.